Hello, I'm Sophie Rovner from the American Chemical Society. Welcome to this news briefing from the ACS Spring 2019 National Meeting in Orlando. We are joined today by Dr. Karen Steelman of Shumla Archaeological Research and Education Center. She's uncovering the secrets of ancient rock art using X-ray vision. Dr. Steelman.
Good morning. So my name's Karen, and I am an archaeological chemist. What that means is I use chemistry to answer questions about the past. And my area of focus is on rock paintings, so paintings that are painted on cave and rock shelter walls. And I work for a nonprofit research center that is located in the lower Pecos Canyon lands of southwest Texas. That area has hundreds and hundreds of rock art sites, and they are large murals. They're not like little stick figures that maybe most people are used to thinking about. So this is at Rattlesnake Canyon. It's a site just adjacent to the Rio Grande River, and it is a 32-meter wide panel with figures as tall as I am or taller. And it's a very complex mural. We used a portable technology that's available to researchers called portable X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy. And it just means we use a little ray gun. I don't know. I think the next picture is just, I don't know if the animations are going to work or not. But yeah, there they go. So we were analyzing this spot here. And if you do the next one. If it'll go.
Next slide? Or
yeah, that next animation. You can see it's a handheld instrument. It weighs about 5 pounds. It's available from different instrument manufacturers. What's great about it is I can put it in my backpack and hike for a mile or two to a rock art site. And it's an elemental analysis technique. There's really a lot of advances in portable technologies that have allowed us to be able to learn things that we wouldn't be able to without having to take a sample destructively. So this is a non-destructive technique. So keep going. And maybe one more, I don't know. So that was actually a possible gunshot location that was on the wall that we were analyzing. It was probably vandalism that was done in the early 1900s because of the elemental signature that we saw. And that's something that, it confirms that the damage occurred there at the site. But what we really did in the study, and you can go ahead and click, it didn't really matter, is that we're using chemistry to learn about the pigment. That's really what we're focusing on. Is we know that the reds and yellows were made with iron minerals, and the blacks, most people might think they were made with charcoal, but they're actually made with a manganese pigment. And so these were minerals and ores that the ancient people were collecting and processing and making paint. It wasn't just sort of haphazard. This was a process. They were really doing ancient chemistry in their own way by processing these paint samples. The research I presented yesterday at the conference was really talking about the ability to see underneath layers. So because there's a lot of paint layering at the site. And so we're able to see the elemental concentrations of paint that you can't see with the naked eye because there's another color painted on top of it. And so we're able to understand the order in which the paint was applied to the wall. And what we're learning is that these are compositions. They're not just one figure was painted and then somebody came along and painted another figure next to it, but this was a planned mural or composition just like you would see in a church. These were important sites to the people. So this slide just talks about the chemistry of how the instrument works. I'm not, it is an X-ray instrument, and so you have an X-ray source. It interacts with the sample, and then the actual sample emits X-rays back to the instrument, to the detector, And those are, the energy of those x-rays tell you which elements are present. So it tells you that there's iron present or manganese present. It is not a molecular analysis technique in that it doesn't tell me that there's hematite or goethite, which are different iron minerals. It just tells me that there's iron. But the ability to do something non-destructive and in situ at a site is pretty awesome. So.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? And if so, please state your name and affiliation before asking your question.
Bela Buslik, American Chemical Society. When you're looking at these things, you mentioned that there are various layers there, and the lowest layers tend to be black or like manganese or iron stuff, overlaid by reds and greens and yellows or something of that sort. How do you distinguish that those were actually the original layers? But there are many salts of iron and manganese that are of a rainbow of colors, and when you overlay something with or paint something on the thing, the lower layer might be in a very different environment, like. If there's sulfur compounds, black iron sulfide and manganese sulfide would appear, but they may not have been there at the beginning. How do you know that it's actually physically painted there on some kind of a background? Because
Right. So I think, what we do is we take hundreds of measurements. So we're taking, I think we took in a day 171 measurements at this site. And we're taking measurements of the unpainted rock as a control directly adjacent to the paintings so that we see that those maybe natural weathering salts that you're discussing are not present. That these are painted on limestone. And so we know what is in the limestone because we analyze those unpainted areas. And then we will sort of raster across a painting to look for any differences across it. What we're really looking for, it's really a team effort. It's not just me as the chemist, it's the archaeologist there who has more of an art background. And so she's looking at the composition. And we're looking at areas that she suspects that there may be paint underneath it because there's like a band of black and then there's all of a sudden red. And the question is, did they paint the black and did they paint the red, or did they paint all of the black and then paint the red over it? So we're not, you have to have both sets of information. You have to have the art and archaeology information working with the chemistry. And it's that ability to, see if it's sort of uniform in that area. There are some areas on the panel where you can actually see the underneath layer because it is degrading. And so it's called a spall when a little rock flake breaks off from the surface. And we do also use a complementary technique, which is a lot cheaper than portable X-ray fluorescence, and it's just a digital microscope, and it has a USB on it, and we can stick that into a tablet and then look. So we're using kind of these two techniques in tandem, but a lot of times the optical imagery doesn't work because the paintings are in sometimes a degraded fashion, and so you have to. That's where this technique comes in to play. But it's because we know we can see the painting and suspect that there might be an underneath layer. We're not just looking at where there's just a single color and we don't know if there was something there or not. We don't suspect it in some cases. So we also analyze those locations because we took samples where it was just red, and that's iron. And we didn't see any manganese because that was just a single red painting. And so that doesn't have any of those underneath layers as well. So that's kind of a control, I guess, in a way, to your question as well.
Thank you.
Laura Cassidy with ACS. Why is it important to determine how the paint was layered? You mentioned it indicates there was like deliberate layering, but does that tell us anything about the people and their culture?
Well, I think when most people, okay, so this art was created 2,000 to 4,000 years ago, and I think when most people hear the word hunter-gatherer, they have a perception. And you have to realize that these people had the same brain as us, and they're the same people as us. They're not like cavemen that can't speak. And they're very sophisticated. And I think knowing that they planned an art piece brings an awareness of sophistication and importance of this art to our minds. There's another site where we actually are starting to, that's not Rattlesnake Canyon, it's called the White Shaman site, and it is managed by the Whitty Museum in San Antonio. And we've also done this technique there. And what's really neat about that site is that the archaeologist that's a co-author on the paper, Dr. Carolyn Boyd, she has started to use ethnography from northern Mexico, indigenous groups, and look at the art through that lens. And there was a painting of a deer, and it has dots on its body. And they could see, using the optical microscopy, 11 dots. But there was one area, she thought she knew who the figure represented in their indigenous culture, but he would have had 12 dots. And so we used the technique to look for that 12th dot, and we found it. And you can, once you know where it is, you can see it, but it's, hard to see. And it turns out that, kind of related to more recent, like the Aztec and the Mesoamerican societies, who have a similar belief system, a core belief. There's something called the archaic core that anthropologists study in Mesoamerican and even northern Mexico. And it would be an avatar of Venus, the Lord of the 12th day, the Lord of the dawn. And it actually opens up the interpretation of that panel to confirm that figure has 12 dots.
Oh, interesting. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So Katie Cottingham with ACS.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So you mentioned that there was gunshot damage at one of the sites. So what measures are being taken to prevent that from happening again?
So at the particular site I showed, there's only 2 locations on that 32-meter wide panel. So that's actually pretty good compared to other sites that I've been to. But I would say that most of the damage that happened via gunshot damage in the area was probably done in the early 1900s when we had a different cultural mindset. Most of the rock art in this area in Texas is owned by private ranchers, and they take very good care of their sites. And we're really honored to work with them and learn about these important cultural heritage sites on their land. So most private landowners, they only allow people to go to sites on a guided tour, and some of the sites are along rivers, and there are people who trespass. And that's something that they're working to, they put up signs saying you're on private property, things like that, just like a national park or a state park would do as well. But it's usually in the hands of private landowners.
And so you mentioned there was one painting with a deer with dots.
Mm-hmm.
What other kinds of scenes are you seeing when you do this technique and when you go to these sites?
So I work with archaeologists, and archaeologists are really good at classifying things and grouping things into categories. We have a lot of what we call anthropomorphs, which is just a human-like figure. But they often are not, it's not realistic depictions. The figures often have their arms out to their sides like this, and They often have, they're holding a lot of tools and paraphernalia. They have spear throwers. So before the bow and arrow, people used spear throwers. And they have a lot of streamers and decorations coming off of them. They even have what we call speech breath. They have something coming out of their mouth. So if you've ever seen like some of the Mesoamerican scrolls that have like little things coming, like little speech coming out of their mouths.
It's kind of like a cartoon.
Yes,
bubble or
absolutely,
something.
exactly like a cartoon balloon. A lot of times we see spattered paint. There's lots of application methods that they were using. They were using brushes and their fingers, and they were using splatter paint, sometimes stencils. We see a lot of animals depicted in the art. And then we see shapes that you don't see in nature. And I think that's a real clue that this is ritual art that has a supernatural component to it, in that you have, we classify things. So we have something called box with legs. And we have just arches and crenellated shapes and all kinds of abstract designs.
Any further questions? All right, well, thank you. The archived version of this session will soon be posted at bit.ly/ACSlive_Orlando 2019. Please join us for our next press conference at 9:30 a.m. today on a newly identified antibacterial agent that could treat a disease in juice plants. Thank you very much.